Hi folks, it's been an interesting month in which my planned TBR pile, normally pretty reliable process, let me down, at least in a couple of examples, requiring some fancy footwork on my part to avoid me getting caught in a dreaded reading slump. We're going to take a look at the whole of my reading month, all 16 books, pretty good tally even for me, warts and all, starting with the books that I enjoyed the least and working my way up to the book of the month. Before we do that though, let's take a look at the one book that was on my planned list that I just didn't get to. It didn't make the cut, I just ran out of time. And that is Modoran by David Bunch. I've heard interesting things about this book, but it'll go back on the shelves and live to fight another day. The downside, of course, of doing these in reverse order is that it means we're going to have to tackle the disappointments first. So bear with me. The first was Cowl by Neal, and it's been a long time, like maybe 15 or 20 years since I've read any Neal. And I've only read a few. The first of the Agent Cormac books, the line of polity books. And my recollection is that they were, bangy, crashy fun. And over the last couple of years, while I've been on a sort of accumulation spree of science fiction, I've got myself quite a lot more. And Cowl was chosen for me by the Decision Dice of Destiny. Although I do have a physical copy, as you can see, I listened to it on audiobook for the most part whilst I was out running. And I got through most of it that way, probably about 80%. And then I had a bout of flu, which kind of knocked me sideways for a week or two. And it was another 10 days or more before I got to the final part of the book, before I could run again. What momentum I had was gone by that stage, and what scant grip I had on the plot and the characters was lost. And I, frankly, really struggled to pay attention to the final 20%. It was a bit of a slog. So Cowl is a time travel gig. The base setting where we begin is in a sort of dystopian England 100 or 200 years in the future. And we're introduced to teenage junkie and part-time prostitute Polly, and she gets caught up in bizarre affairs and ends up with something called a tor attached to her forearm, which rapidly becomes part of her flesh. And this tor thingy is a living scale of something called the Tor Beast, funnily enough, a sort of ravening interdimensional creature that eats everything in its path, growing all the time. And it doesn't seem to be fussy which dimension dinner comes from. And this Tor thing that's attached to her arm, I couldn't quite work out if it allows her or causes her to travel backwards in time gradually. There are competing forces from the future in this book. There are heliothanes and umbrathanes, plus something called the Cowl itself, which is, I think, a living heliothane weapon, which is either malevolent or benevolent, depending on which faction you belong to. But it seems to be willing to risk everything to ensure that it exists for time immemorial in a universe where life succeeds. At least I think that's what's going on. The most engaging parts of the story involve the aforementioned Polly. She gets clean from the drugs and more intelligent and smart as the story progresses. Plus she meets a bunch of folks in the past, including, slightly oddly, Henry VIII. And there are dinosaurs and other megafauna, which, is mildly diverting for a little while. But otherwise, unfortunately, I found Cowl to be a bit of a jumble. I didn't get on with it at all, not helped by my flu-enforced break, I'm sure. And I'm now looking at the other 15 or 20 Asher books on my shelves and wondering if I'll ever read them. He has his fans, legions of them, and in theory, the basic military space opera model that Asher usually employs should work for me, but Cowl, I'm afraid to say, certainly did not. So I give this 4, maybe 5 if I'm really pushing the boat out of 10. Not a good start. The next stinker from my planned TBR pile for August was The Labyrinth Key by Howard v. Hendrix, and this, I'm afraid, is another mess of a book. The premise is interesting enough. A guy called Jaron Kwok is an NSA researcher, and he's in Hong Kong, but then suddenly disappears, leaving behind mysterious ashes on his hotel bed. It's like he's spontaneously combusted, but are the ashes in fact ashes? The local cops investigate, as do a whole alphabet soup of other agencies within China and from the US. Ben Cho is, or was, I guess, Kwok's understudy and is tasked with figuring out what on earth happened to his boss and to pick up his research in the development of a quantum computer. The US is in a race with China mainly to develop their first quantum computer, which some think will be the key that unlocks all other encryption and offers unbreakable secrecy to the party that wins the race. There's a lot of almost interesting references to cryptography from the 1600s and subsequently, but it was done in a fairly heavy-handed and maybe even repetitive, hand-wavy sort of way. There were a preposterous number of conspiring parties, some of them government-based, some of them rogue billionaires, some cyberpunk rebels and others too. And there was some nonsense about a self-generating singularity. And there was an even more daft secret about Ben Cho's true identity, which made me want to throw the book across the room. Fundamentally, by the end, I just didn't care who was doing what to whom or why. I think it was just a bad book, and I don't know what Broderick and De Filippo were thinking of. Put it on their list of 101 best science fiction novels. I give Labyrinth Key 5 out of 10. Next up is Disquiet Gods by Christopher Ruocchio, and this is book 6 of the Sun Eater series. If we referred just to the novels, there are a bunch of other offshoot novellas and other material too. And first, let me say that I have enjoyed pretty much all of the previous Sun Eater books, and they've all been 8s or 9s or even 9.5s out of 10 for me. So my expectations going into Disquiet God as we head towards the crescendo of the series, book 7's out later this year. My expectations were high. This is the longest by some distance of the books in the series so far, 850 pages, and apparently book 7 will be even longer, which, having slogged my way through this one, is a little bit of a worry, if I'm honest. It's overlong and was just boring, I'm afraid, for good chunks of it. And again, to repeat myself, I've enjoyed the other books, so it takes quite a bit for me to say I was bored with this. After breaking the Emperor's nose at the end of Ashes of Man, Hadrian Marlowe has spent 200 years in exile on Jad, just is effectively retired from being the Emperor's dog's body, and he's rebuffed any attempts of the Empire to winkle him out of his hidey hole on Jad. And eventually, though, happily for the plot of this book, a messenger gets through to him and gives him a bunch of news from home, including the death of his father. And amongst the papers is an official pardon from the Emperor and a request that he go off-world to resume his previous mission to figure out what the hell's going on with the so-called Watchers and the Quiet, who seem to be, between them, the puppet masters that are using the Cielcin to destroy the galaxy. There was a lot of stuff about alien relics and messages from the gods and blah, 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 blah. I don't object to anyone having whatever religious beliefs they like. But for this atheist, there was a little bit too much religion going on in this book. I gather that Christopher Ruocchio kind of got God or found him again in the form of Catholicism about halfway through writing the series, and I think that really shows in this book, and it was an unwelcome addition from my perspective, unfortunately. There were a couple of other aspects that grated. Lorien, one of Hadrian's crew, who last we heard was banged up in the Empire's most secure prison planet, is somehow now busted out and performing some kind of senior military role for the Latarians, who are not even in the Empire. I've subsequently been told that that escape and Lorien's character development is covered in one of the novellas, but I just haven't read any of those. Christopher Ruocchio, in the preceding book or two, was quite free dishing out the death and destruction, and wasn't shy about killing off some of Hadrian's closest companions, including one in particular that I was quite distressed about at the end of Ashes of Man, which was a shame because that was an aspect of the story that I really enjoyed. And there is an obvious attempt in this book to replace that key relationship in a couple of different ways that I eventually found it even a little bit jarring. But basically, I think I'm still bitter about the ending of Ashes of Man. So I don't know. My expectations were high from my experience with the prior 5 books, as I said, and I'm afraid to say I found this book, comparatively speaking, a bit of a disappointment. It did not hit the heights for me that the other books did, far from it. Book 7, as I said, comes out later this year, and I will be pushing on to complete the series. It seems churlish to drop it like a hot potato at this stage. I feel like I'm committed at this point. So it wasn't terrible. I just didn't like it anywhere near as much as I enjoyed the others. So let's give it 6 out of 10. And like Disquiet Gods, To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers was not on my plan TBR. This was a book that I picked up in the hope of recovering from my disappointment at the first 2 books that we've spoken about. This is a novella, a slender book, which is completely different in setting to the Wayfarer books, for which she's probably better known. And I enjoyed those books for the most part, so I was interested to see where she went with this one. We follow a 4-person science team as they go on a tour of 4 habitable moons and planets around a single star light years away from us here on Earth. It's been surveyed before at a distance by drones and telescopes and the like, but this is the first crewed exploration mission. And due to the distances involved, they get their news packages from Earth only sporadically, and it's always several years out of date just because of the delay in the transmission time. Interestingly, in this book, instead of terraforming the planets, maybe in an echo of Frederick Pohl's Man Plus, it's the humans that are reshaped to be able to handle the environment of any of the places they visit, however hostile. There's no invasive surgery like the guy in Man Plus, though, for the crew of this ship. Instead, somewhat implausibly, I think, they just stick a patch on their arm and they wake up ready to go. I'm not sure if they wake up the next day or if it's after the next hypersleep or whatever, but by that time anyway, some transformation, the necessary transformation, has been made to their physiology, which makes them able to handle the next planet. We get a front seat view to the dynamics between the crew, which is all rather cosy. It is a Becky Chambers book after all, and we get to experience their wonder as they catalogue and survey the life on these new planets, some more troublesome than others. The messages from Earth suddenly stop though, and together with the crew we wonder what's happened. Is it a problem with their antenna? Have they just been forgotten about? It's been a while after all, or has something more drastic happened back home? I didn't dislike To Be Taught If Fortunate, but if I'm honest, not a huge amount happens. It's a bit of a travel log across the 4 planets, and being a brief book, it didn't linger long enough, it's easy for me to say, in any one place to be that interesting to me. So overall, whilst I enjoyed it up to a point, it didn't have the charm for me of the Wayfarers books. I give this 6, 7 if I'm feeling generous, out of 10. Next up was the Volume 1 of the Hall of Fame by Robert Silverberg. And as regular viewers will know, I don't usually feel obliged to complete a short story collection or an anthology when I pick it up in the same way that I might with a novel. By definition, of course, each story is discrete and self-contained in its own right. So I feel completely comfortable reading a selection of them and then putting it down again to finish at some other point in the future. So there are 11 stories in this part 1 of the Hall of Fame, and this time round I read 7 of those 11, and I'll get to the other 4 at some point. Of the 7 that I read this time around, 2 in particular have stayed with me since then. The first of them is Microcosmic God by Theodore Sturgeon. And on his Bond-Lair island, mad scientist Kidder creates a new form of life, which progresses through its generations very quickly, developing more and more intelligence as it goes. But this development and the use of the intelligence is totally under the control of mad scientist Kidder. He institutes a policy of decimation, so if they do something wrong or it isn't what he's asked for, half the population is eliminated for the encouragement of the others. And using his bottled workforce, he's able to invent numerous new tools and technology, making an absolute fortune in the process. But his banker tries to rip him off. Fortunately for Kidder, he has the upper hand when it comes to devising countermeasures. The best of the bunch in this book, though, I think for me, is Nightfall by, of course, Isaac Asimov, and it tells the tale of a very familiar seeming civilization on a planet with a handful of suns, which is in perpetual daylight. They've never seen the stars, except that they have. Every couple of thousand years, in fact, there's an eclipse which plunges them into absolute darkness. And there are worrying signs that in the past, this has resulted in riots, in collective madness, and general bad civilization-ending things. So the central mystery is, are they sufficiently enlightened this time around to avoid that fate? You know, what with science and all of that stuff. I like that story a lot. And that's probably the highlight so far, although there are still 4 that I haven't read yet. Next up was We All Died at Breakaway Station by Richard C. Meredith, which is book 1 in the 25-book series that Venture SF issued in the mid-1980s. And each of them is a space adventure of one kind or another. I knew going into this one that it was a tale of a last-ditch defence of Breakaway Station. The station is a vital node in Earth's FTL comms network, the destruction of which would have serious consequences at a pivotal time in the conflict with the Gillies, the evil aliens of the piece. I was expecting, something like the movie Zulu, but with spaceships, wave after wave of Gillies attacking and being fended off by the brave humans in their spaceships. But no, it wasn't like that, or mostly not. The setup for this book is that there's been a terrible battle with the Gillies, resulting in much death and destruction. With our backs against the wall, all able-bodied starmen are needed for the fight. So 3 knackered old ships, including a hospital ship and 2 heavy escort cruisers, have been equipped with a skeleton crew of revived humans. They're a right muddle of broken people. The skipper of the Iwo Jima has his legs and lower torso replaced by a metal cylinder. The comms officer has a plastic face, and on it goes with the rest of the crew. Their mission is to escort the hospital ship back to Earth, where its cargo of frozen popsicles, 20,000 dead or wounded men and women, can be revived and repaired and sent back into the fight. The 3 ships get as far as Breakaway Station, but find themselves to be the only means of defence for the vital station, which has already been badly damaged by a previous Gilly attack, and another is almost certainly on the way. Badly damaged and thinly crewed by broken people, can these 3 ships prevent the station's destruction and keep the humans in the war? It's all pretty stirring stuff. We get some glimpses into life on some of the key planets and on other battleships that are caught in other engagements, or on isolated scout ships. Sacrifices are nobly made, mutinies are put down, and battles are bravely fought. It's clear that we're up against it with the Gillies. We get some insight into the Gillies' physiology, which is both interesting and a bit disgusting, if I'm honest. We All Died at Breakaway Station was written in the late 1960s, and the style is therefore, a little bit dated, but not so that it was problematic from my perspective anyway. And the climactic battle is suitably heroic. I had fun. It's a perfectly good start to a long-term reading project to read all 25 in the series. I give We All Died at Breakaway Station 7 out of 10. Another book that was not on my planned TBR list that I plucked off my shelves in a desperate hope of recovering some reading mojo was The Menace from Farside by McDonald, and this is a novella set in the same setting as his Lunar trilogy. It's aimed at younger readers, it's YA effectively, so there are none of the politics and internecine fighting that dominate the main trilogy. In this book, we're focused on 4 teenagers, all children in a so-called ring marriage, a sort of circular polyamory arrangement. One of these teens decides that they should all go on an adventure to the other side of the moon to find the first footprint on the moon, Neil Armstrong's, of course. And they make their way there efficiently enough, hitching a ride on a cargo train and borrowing a moon buggy. But of course, it wouldn't be a very exciting book if things didn't go pear-shaped, and the 4 are quickly in quite a bit of bother. The guts of their story is them figuring their way out of trouble with a bit of help from the parental credit card. It's a brief but engaging read, and I enjoyed being back in this setting, and I'm now keen to give the full Lunar trilogy a reread. I'm also reminded that Ian McDonald is working on a Lunar prequel that will be set some decades before the events in the original books, in the real frontier days of the development of the moon. I give The Menace from Farside 7 out of 10. Next is In Light of Impossible Stars, which is actually book 3 of Embers of War, and we'll see book 2 a little bit later on. The Trouble Dog and Sal Constance and her crew of rotating misfits take more of a back seat in this 3rd episode. And in this book, the Trouble Dog and Sal Constance and her crew of rotating misfits take more of a back seat. They're very much still there, still bagging point of view chapter airtime, but my sense is that the counterpointing thread, the parallel thread, gets more time on stage. We're introduced in that thread to Cordelia Parr and her brother Michael, who are scavengers living along with a substantial human population on an alien relic, a series of giant orbital plates. Cordelia is plucked from this life by total strangers who claim to work for her father, but her father's dead, or so Cordelia thinks. She has some powers related to the relics, and it's gradually revealed how that power came about, and more importantly, what they allow her to do. This plot thread and the main one involving Trouble Dog and the rest of the crew converge on something called the Intrusion, which is a rent or a rift, a portal to another universe through which bad things come, but also through which good things have fled in the other direction. And there's a link in that intrusion to the Marble Armada and to Cordelia and her father and to Sal Constance and to the origins of the House of Reclamation itself, and even Nod, the 6-legged engineer, has a revelation to provide. Plot threads from all 3 books come to a nice crescendo at the end of this one. And overall, I found, and we're going to look at book 2 in a minute, I found all 3 books are a satisfying space opera. There's plenty of bangy, crashy battles, but also a nice found family vibe and some real high-stakes peril on both a small and a vast scale. There are ship's avatars, and they're fun, and there's some cosmic mystery to be solved too. And I challenge you not to fall quickly in love with Trouble Dog as a character, and Nod, the engineer, is a close second. I did find that this 3rd instalment was slightly less strong than the other 2, but really not by much. And I guess I just wanted maybe a bit more of my favourite characters. I give In Light of Impossible Stars 7 out of 10. Next up was 10,000 Light Years from Home by James Tiptree Jr., and this is a collection of her short stories, for which she's much better known than for her novels. And I was keen to get stuck into this collection. I had heard tell that this is not her best work, but there's certainly several stories in here that did work very well for me indeed. Mama Come Home and Help are twin stories featuring the same characters, albeit separated by 3 years on their timeline. The characters all work for an offshoot of the CIA, and they're specialists in languages, analysis and related skills. And when the aliens arrive in the first story, our group becomes involved, heavily involved. And then in the second story, there are yet more aliens, and this time they have religion. And they quickly come to see our earthly religions as a heresy that must be eradicated. Cathedrals and temples and the like are wiped off the map. And parallels are drawn by the characters in the story with the European colonisation and subjugation of the Americas. They fear it's not going to end well for us poor earthlings. Fortunately for us, as the title suggests, help is on the way. And at this point in Tiptree's career, she was assumed to be a man. She's using a man's name after all. And actually, many of the stories are quite horny from a man's perspective. In one involving time travel, a 16-year-old girl loses her virginity to a man quite a lot older than her, we're led to understand. Although it's entirely consensual, I think the power dynamic would be frowned upon in this day and age. But the truth behind that encounter is revealed, and I thought was quite clever, and I enjoyed the way that story panned out. And there were others that I enjoyed too, including another story about a time traveller who's gradually making his way back via annual and very brief, a matter of seconds, appearances in the crater of a former physics laboratory which destroyed itself and subsequently triggered an apocalyptic scenario. The annual appearances even get built into the local culture as it drags itself kicking and screaming out the Stone Age following the apocalypse. And superstitions develop, and it's only several hundred years later that sufficient advances have been made to understand what's really happening. There was a tale involving talking doorways and tiny female lodgers who lived in a man's coat pocket that I also enjoyed. And in another, a man has his pain receptors disconnected so that he can endure the repeated explorations of dangerous planetary environments. Sick of it all though, however hard he tries to end it, the ship's auto-dock fixes him up again. And that story then progresses in a way that I also enjoyed. And I think if this collection is an example of her weaker work, then I'm very much looking forward to reading more. I give this a strong 7 out of 10. Next on my planned TBR list for the month, I read Doggerland by Ben Smith, and this is from 2019. And it's an interesting setting. We're out in the North Sea, to the east of England, above what at one time in the distant past was a land bridge between the east of England and northern Europe, which was known by later historians, and hence the title, as Doggerland. But in this timeline, in this patch of sea, is an extensive but now extremely decrepit wind turbine farm. The two main characters, the boy and the old man, who remain unnamed for nearly all of the book, are a two-person team. They're stationed out on something called the Rig, a maintenance platform for the wind farm, and they're responsible for keeping the turbines turning and the electricity flowing to the mainland. They are isolated, literally in the middle of the ocean. They're in each other's orbit, and they sometimes coincide for a stilted conversation, but mostly they keep themselves to themselves. The boy is there, it quickly transpires, because his father, who did the job before him, reneged on his contract, doing a runner to who knows where and to what fate. The boy, his next of kin, is indentured in his place under the terms of the contract, and we wonder what sort of world enforces that kind of contract. During the book, we get glimpses or hints or clues as to the state of the wider society back on the mainland. The rig is resupplied on an irregular schedule by an electric boat, and the food that they receive is basic. Tinned vegetables are actually some unidentified carbohydrate that's been pressed into approximately vegetable shape. The sea itself is another big clue. Both the boy and the old man spend quite a bit of time fishing. The boy in the forlorn hope, it seems, of catching something to eat, and the old man is fishing for junk, for useful flotsam and jetsam. The sea is full of detritus. This is clearly a polluted, dying world. Some ecological disaster has befallen the planet at some point in the past, and there are occasional references to coastal flooding, incursions and migrations, mirroring the inundation that in prehistoric times flooded Doggerland. The boy becomes obsessed with knowing what happened to his father, with tracking him down if possible so that they can be together, fulfilling the broken promise made by a father to his young boy when he said, "I'll be back for you." So the tone of the book is bleak. It's not quite as bleak as The Road, say, but it is heading in that direction, I think. Everything is decaying and entropy is accelerating. Smith perhaps borrows more than just the tone from The Road. The boy and the old man kind of, in some respects, mirror the two characters in The Road, and we're left to construct a picture of the wider world and what happened to it through a narrow viewfinder, through the perspectives of just these two people. And Smith's writing is sparse and pared down. I wouldn't compare it too closely with Cormac McCarthy's, of course, but I thought it was pretty good. Frequent viewers will know that I'm a sucker for an end-of-the-world tale, and whilst that aspect of it, the story, is not front and centre, is very much the backdrop. Particularly through the old man, we get a deep sense of hopelessness, and his motivations for staying at his post when he doesn't seem to care about actually keeping the turbines turning are unclear, until a jarring revelation later on. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed Doggerland, and I give it a strong 8 out of 10. Next up is Fleet of Knives, which is book 2 of the Embers of War trilogy, and this is good, wholesome, sweary space opera fun. After the ruckus in the first book, Trouble Dog, who is an ex-warship after all, is getting a refit and has permission to tool up, getting back most of her military teeth. The House of Reclamation, a sort of galactic Red Cross, is trying to adjust to their new reality as a junior partner to the relics of their long-dormant inspiration, the Harthers. And these relics are an outrageously large fleet of heavily armed frigates, the Marble Armada. Most of this book is the house, and by extension Sal and Troubledog and her crew, trying to carry on their business of saving lives, whilst the Marble Armada take an extremely robust approach to preventing war, their stated reason for being. Lots of the action in this book takes place on an abandoned alien generation ship, upon which the remains of the crew of a damaged smuggler ship have taken refuge. There are nasty, heavily armed crayfish aliens which turn out to have a worrying origin, and there's the threat that the Marble Armada seems to pose, and more of the crew interactions which I enjoyed in the first book. And both Sally and Troubledog develop further as characters too. I enjoyed it and went straight on to book 3, which we've already spoken about. I give Fleet of Knives a solid 8 out of 10. Next is A Wrinkle in the Skin by John Christopher, and John Christopher, of course, is the author of the Tripods books that folks of a certain age will remember the TV show, at least in the UK, but more notably perhaps he's the author of The Death of Grass. And in that book, he imagines a world where our food supply is devastated by a virus that wipes out all the cereal crops, plus, of course, grazing land for livestock. Things quickly go south in that book. In A Wrinkle in the Skin, he once again finds a way to end life as we know it. In this case, there are devastating global earthquakes that pancake every building and squish anyone unlucky enough to be in the building at the time. And all of that happens in the opening pages of the book. Everybody is dead. Of course, it would be a short book if it really was everybody, but near as damn it everybody. Our protagonist is Matthew. He's a tomato grower, amongst other things, on Guernsey. Matthew happens to be outside when the megaquake strikes. He's a bit battered about, but he's mostly unscathed. He begins rescue attempts in the nearby buildings and finds mostly dead folks, until he finds Billy, who's a young lad who becomes his sidekick. A significant side effect of this megaquake is that the surface of the Earth has changed, so much so that the seas have retreated. The English Channel, for example, has been drained, which is handy as Matthew needs to go to England to see if he can find his daughter. And that trip through what's a much changed landscape is the guts of the story, I suppose. The things they see, the people that they meet, and the dangers, and there are plenty of them, that they face. And like any good end-of-the-world tale, there are bands of survivors, some goodies and some baddies. I do think that this book was less grim than The Death of Grass. It was less desperation and less complacency. The disaster in this book was not slow motion. Millions don't starve. It was instantaneous and completely unexpected, a cosmic throw of the dice, totally changing the world forever. There's the expected scavenging for scarce tinned food. There are none of the mod cons. There's no electricity or lighting. And if you're lucky, you get caught up with a resourceful and civilised bunch. Or if not, you can try to take what they have. I am a sucker for an end-of-the-world tale, as I've said many times, and I enjoyed this. I give it a strong 8 out of 10. Next up is a 1980s classic, a Grass by Sherri S. Tepper. And we're at some point in the future, I forget exactly how far, and humanity's on a bunch of planets now, and something called the Sanctity rules the show. It's some sort of fundamentalist theocracy with something of an angel fixation. There's a plague raging across human space and there is no known cure. We're all going to die. Rigo and his family are sent to Grass to quietly investigate the total absence of the plague there. Grass, as you might have guessed, is covered in grass, many different varieties of grass. And Rigo and his wife Marjorie are horsey fox hunting types, and they bring their horses and their jobfers and all that malarkey with them. And what passes for aristocrats on Grass live out on ranches and spend their time at parties and fox hunting and generally being useless. And yes, there are horses and foxes on Grass too, sort of. Marjorie, the wife of the piece, is really the main character and not Rigo, who's a bit of a cardboard cutout, angry husband. And through Marjorie, we gradually, and I do mean gradually, Tepper spoons out details in tantalisingly small portions as the book progresses. But we get to understand the local setup, both the people and the wildlife. And there's more to those local horses and foxes than meets the eye, and not just the obvious and rather vicious, bitey physical differences. I did really enjoy the vibe of this book. The wildlife is interesting. The local population, at first apparently subservient to the aristos, the ranchers, are great and very nuanced. And even the priests and the other religious orders are considerably more three-dimensional than they initially appear. This book is like a giant onion, and Tepper peels it one atom-thick layer at a time. And that might be frustrating or annoying even in another author's hands, but Tepper does it with a deftly enough touch. And I was interested and engaged throughout. I think I found it to be a very interesting book, and if you like an alien ecosystem, then I think that this would work well for you. I gave it a strong 8 out of 10. Next up was Far From the Light of Heaven by Tade Thompson, and this was a book that I plucked off my shelves in the hope of avoiding a reading slump. And this is essentially a locked room mystery where the room is the starship Ragtime, captained by Michelle Campion. It's her maiden voyage, and the Ragtime is heading for Bloodroot with a cargo of colonists in hypersleep. Campion is awoken from hypersleep as they approach Bloodroot, but all is not well. Several, I think 30 from memory, of the hundreds of passengers are missing from their pods. A distress call is sent to Bloodroot, and an investigator, Rashid Finn, is pulled off of disciplinary leave, off of suspension really, and sent to intercept and figure out what's happened on the Ragtime. The missing passengers are soon found, but they're dismembered and stashed in a storage cupboard. The grisly task of identifying the body parts begins. The ship's AI starts behaving weirdly, glitching and not responding to commands from Captain Campion, and the ship's autonomous bots are also behaving oddly, even dangerously. It turns out, after a bit of detective work, that among the victims is the billionaire owner of the shipping company which employs Campion, which is a little bit awkward to say the least. There are possibly aliens involved, the so-called Lammers, with whom the humans share Bloodroot as a colony. Michelle's uncle Larry comes from the Lagos station, the last stopping point from the Ragtime, to see what happened to Campion, bringing with him his half-Lammer daughter, Jockey. Things get increasingly fraught on the Ragtime and the plot thickens as mysterious concealed passengers are revealed. Thompson adds in a bit of Afro-spiritualism, which to be honest, I maybe could have done without, but it certainly didn't affect my enjoyment of the book, and maybe even added a little bit of charm. I very much enjoyed the interactions between the odd collection of people that are now on Ragtime, and I particularly like Jockey, the half-Lammer girl, who, like the other Lammers, has some useful tricks up her sleeve. And I enjoyed, to reuse that metaphor again, the gradual peeling of the onion as the truth behind the grisly murders is revealed. I had fun. It's my first Tade Thompson, and I will certainly be reading more. I give it 8 out of 10. Next up is Aztec Century by Christopher Evans, and this is the second of his books that I've read. Aztec Century is a alternate history tale, or you could argue a parallel world tale. You kind of take your pick, and it sort of doesn't matter. Regardless of how, in this book, the Aztecs are the global superpower. Much of the world is already in their grip, and now it's Britain's turn. England has already been invaded and overrun, and the royal family, or the teenage and adult children at least, are on the run, hiding out in rural Wales. The main character and narrator of the book is Princess Catherine, who's the eldest daughter of the king and queen, who by now are prisoners of the Aztecs. Catherine and her small group are grassed up, though, by somebody, and the Aztecs capture them, taking them to a London already being transformed. There are large Aztec pyramids on the banks of the Thames. And we're then exploring what it means to live under occupation, to be a member of the royal family, effectively trapped into being complicit, or at least seeming to be. The Aztec governor, though, is not a cartoon villain. He's not a Nazi in Aztec clothing. He wants to run the country well, and he listens to advice, and he's a pretty handsome chap too. What's a girl to do? Princess Catherine can't help but be a little bit attracted to him, but she's far too sensible and, well, British for that, isn't she? I enjoyed Catherine as a character. There were equal measures of British stiff upper lip and common sense. Her sidekick is a surly Welsh gardener that's become a trusted part of her household, and he seems to have connections to the shadowy resistance movement. The dynamic between Alex, Catherine's husband, is a little bit odd. He's dead for a start. And for most of the book, the interactions between them is via a computer interface, an AI version of her husband. I do like an alternate history, and I enjoyed that aspect of the book. There's the obvious Aztec element, which is interesting, but there are also glimpses into other ways that the timeline in this book is different from ours, from car technology and the brands to the shape of international alliances and the shifting borders between Aztec territory in North America and the territory of the Native Americans and of the New Englanders in the Northeast. I did feel that the plot went a bit off-piste in the final 20%. Christopher Evans kind of throws the kitchen sink at it, and there were some surprises that were landed that felt a little bit tricksy and out of kilter with the rest of the book to me. Things just weren't the way that the book described them. And I suppose that's fair, given that our understanding of this world comes from Catherine's narration, and there are clearly things that important things, it turns out, that she just wasn't privy to. But I thought that the nature of those surprises were a little bit random. And one in particular was implausible in the extreme. But I don't want to overplay that. Despite all of that, overall, I did enjoy Aztec Century, and I continue to enjoy Christopher Evans' work. I give it a very strong 8 out of 10. Next is Pattern Recognition by William Gibson. And in this book, Case Pollard is a freelance branding advisor, amongst other things. And she's been contracted by Blue Ant, the coolest ad agency in London, to say yay or nay to a logo. And why is she so vital? She has a hypersensitivity to branding, to the point of being allergic to it in some cases. She can look at a logo or a brand and know immediately in her gut if it will be effective or not. On her own time outside of work, Case is obsessed by a viral meme, which is based around the snippets of footage that might be from a movie. Speculation is rife about who the auteur is and why they're posting snippets like this. Is it from a completed work, or is it just snippets from a work in progress? Case is a member of a rather exclusive chat forum that bats such speculation backwards and forwards, sharing intel as they come across it. Case is then, having pronounced on the brand that she's been engaged for, Case is then employed directly by the founder of Blue Ant, the improbably named Hubertus Big End, to uncover the truth behind the mysterious clips of footage. This search is what forms the basis for the majority of the story in pattern recognition. Interestingly, we're not in a science fiction setting. For the most part, we're in an early 2000s London, what Case thinks of as Mirrorland, similar to her native USA, but different in the details, slightly warped even. I enjoyed Case's observations about Mirrorland, and I generally enjoyed the fact that much of the book was set in London, the city of my birth. One of her chat room contacts thinks that he has a line on evidence of a digital watermark on one of the fragments of footage, and that sets off a whole line of international investigation. There are some elements of cryptography, there are ex-NSA agents, and I did worry for a little while that it was going to disappear down the same disappointing rabbit hole as the Labyrinth key that we talked about early on in this video. But I needn't have worried. Gibson is a better writer for a start than Howard Hendrix, and it was handled much more deftly in pattern recognition. I like the idea of somebody having a physical response, sometimes an extreme response to branding and logos, a sort of commentary about the visual bombardment that we're subject to daily, and even worse now, 20 years later, with the internet on full blast. Case's sensitivity is even used as a weapon by her adversaries, in particular, slightly bizarrely, the Michelin Man. Whilst this is the first part of a trilogy, I think that's more in the way of sharing some characters, and the plot in this book does wrap up neatly within the covers. You don't need to read the second book to continue the story, but I will do. I enjoyed it a lot, and I'll be moving on to the sequels as soon as the Dice of Destiny allow. I give Pattern Recognition a solid 9 out of 10, and I'm pleased to say that that means that this is my book of the month for August 2025, Pattern Recognition by William Gibson. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.